Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel, What the Beck. Today I'm going to show you how I made this Crayola inspired apron, and I made this mainly just so when I paint I don't have to worry about getting my clothes dirty, so let's see how I did it. First I took some scraps of fabric and just ironed them out really good. Then I took some recycled clothing such as this really big shirt, and I measured the different panels to see where I could fit the pieces I needed. And the shirt actually had a pocket on it, and I wanted my apron to have a pocket, so I kind of finagled it so that the pocket would be perfectly in the center of the front panel. And I did also iron the recycled clothing as well. Next I got out some Heat and Bond. I got this at a recycle store, and I basically just cut a rectangle to iron my little scraps of fabric onto. I basically made this little template for the crayon that I wanted for like the size and width and all that, and then I ironed the pieces of Heat and Bond to my scraps and cut them out one by one, making sure to keep the edges of the fabric aligned with the edges of the Heat and Bond so that they don't fray. And to get this little pattern here, I just had to do some measurements. So I basically just measured about how wide I'd like the top of the apron to be, and then took like the length measurement, so from where I wanted the collar to be down to around my waist. And finally I took a measurement from the sides, so kind of under my armpits but not all the way like underneath, if that makes any sense. And these are the measurements I came up with for myself, but if you're doing this, yours might be different. So after I had cut that piece out of the apron part, I was peeling off the back of the Heat and Bond and putting the crayons in, and as you can see, the purple one didn't really fit, so I kind of overlapped and trimmed my crayons to fit a bit better. And then I was just measuring and making the little strap for the pocket, and I think this would actually be pretty cute as just like a t-shirt design, but I still wanted to do the apron, so yeah, here's my paper pattern. Then I just centered it over the top of that pocket and cut it out with the seam allowance. You can see a bit better in this picture here. I just folded my little pattern in half and lined it up halfway over the pocket to make sure it was perfectly centered in my panel. And then, yep, I just cut that out with my scissors. And here we have that front piece all together. And then I just put it upside down on the other side of the shirt to make a copy of it for the lining. And I pinned those together, and I didn't sew them quite yet, but I pinned them like this so they would stay together. And then we got to work on the skirt part of the apron. I got this really cute striped fabric, so I just cut off that white strip, and then I just serged all the edges to make them finish so they wouldn't fray. Then I just folded the edges over and hemmed them basically. Since the apron is going to have like open sides, it's not like a skirt that you sew the edges together, I just needed to finish those off. Then I just put some basting stitches in the top part of the skirt. I did 2 rows of these, and I really rather do this by hand, but I figured I'd try it out because I never do it, and I'm going back to doing them by hand after this. But after that, I just pull on the bobbin part of the thread and scrunch it up, and you can tell by my face here that I don't like doing this because I'm always scared the thread is going to snap. I also had to kind of attack it from both ends because I didn't want to put too much stress on the threads, so it took a long time to get this to gather in a nice way that would fit to the bottom of the apron piece that like we made before, the front piece. So yeah, I would recommend doing this by hand with like 2 threads at once. Having 2 rows was nice, but it was just also such a pain, so I don't like doing it with the machine. Here's what the skirt looks like once it's all hemmed and gathered. And moving back to the top part of the apron, I'm putting in this little ribbon and a D-ring so that it's adjustable by tying. That way anyone who comes over can wear this and borrow it if they need to. I also added a D-ring on the side and another like tie so that you can wrap around your waist a bit tighter. and then I sewed around it and clipped the curves to make sure they would turn inside out nicely, and then I flipped the top part inside out and ironed it down really well. You could top stitch this, but I didn't because I was kind of not wanting to do that. I really wanted to get the skirt on, so I placed the gathered part of the skirt right side together with the bottom of the front piece of the apron, and I pinned them together. This can be a bit like fiddly or just like frustrating because even though you know you gathered it down to 16 inches or whatever it was, it always like moves. It's either a little too small or a little too big, so I just kind of like fudge it, break a thread if you have to, and pin down a lot of points so that it doesn't have any more room to like wiggle. Next, I'm gonna just sew in between those two lines of basting stitches, and I tried to be really good about staying in a straight line this time and not going over any pins. Sewing on gathers is kind of frustrating sometimes because it's really thick, and I'm always scared that my machine is gonna like break a needle or something. So I go really slow, and I always make sure to pull out the pin right before it gets to where the needle is, and just continue sewing until you get to the end of the line. And then you're going to just finish off that edge and go back and unpick that second row of basting stitches. So I use a seam ripper for this, but you can also use tiny little scissors. Then I went back to my serger to finish off that edge just to make it a little less bulky. If you don't have a serger, you can use pinking shears for this, or you can do a zigzag stitch along the edge. Then I just took that little tail from the serger thread and tucked it in and pinned up my apron so that the flap from the skirt was lying flat with it. And then I'm just going to top stitch that down so that it doesn't become super bulky at the seam when I'm wearing it. And of course I do this to the other side as well. And like I said, gathering does make your stitching very bulky, so I chose to like iron down the fabric before I sewed it, and I recommend you to do that as well. Again, when you're sewing this, just take your time, really focus on getting it like perfectly straight and aligned with that seam on the bottom, and then the front of your apron will look much more clean, which is a little bit ironic because we're going to be getting paint all over it, but you know what I mean. So one optional method that I did to kind of finish off the ends of my straps were just rounding them off. For the actual ribbon that I'm using as a strap, I cut them like straight across and then folded it down and then folded the ends in so that it makes a nice finished edge. Then I just added a pin to hold it in place while I ironed it and then sewed it together. And I just made sure that I went over it a few times back and forth to really make sure it's strong, because this is the part you're going to be pulling on when you're tying it. And to finish this, I just kind of clipped the ends, but you could tie them together if you wanted to for extra security. Now, I will admit this next bit is entirely aesthetic and not functional at all. I, for some reason, thought that these would be like overalls when I first made it, but then I decided I wanted to do the adjustable strap. So these are just for looks, but I basically just took these two big yellow buttons and sewed them on with some green yarn and a really sharp yarn needle. You probably should do this before you sew the liner to the front piece, but I didn't think of that because I did this in a like ADHD induced craze. So yeah, I did it afterward, and I basically just sewed an X over the button, and then I did it twice for security because even though they're not being used, I don't want them to fall off. And then I just tied it in a triple square knot on the back, I think is what it's called. And yeah, these are super cute. I really like the buttons. I'm glad I put them on there even though they're not functional at all. Now, to make this look like the image I had in my head, I wanted it to be sort of like cartoony with like an outline. So I took this fabric paint, it's just slick puffy paint, and I did a few practice squiggles on a piece of paper to make sure that it wasn't clogged or anything. And then I got to work adding in the black lines. I had a few strategies for trying to keep this neat. So if I ever felt like my hand was going to like cramp or like hurt, I stopped and I took a break. Sometimes it was for like a minute, sometimes it was for like a day or a week. I also worked from right to left, and I did like all the outer lines first, and then I would wait like a day or two to go in and do the inner lines. I also kept a piece of paper or paper towel on hand so that I could wipe the nozzle if it was like overloaded with gunk, or if it seemed like it needed to get an air bubble out, then I would do that on the paper towel instead of on the art project that I was making. While I had the puffy paint out, I also used some white to kind of seal the end of the elastic strip that I had used for one of the straps. This was from a like rescued piece of clothing, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to unravel. So I put the paint on it and let it dry. And then disaster struck. I had a problem with the paint. So basically I knocked into it at some point and it made a mess, and I was really upset. So I tried to fix it, and it just wasn't getting better. But yeah, you live and you learn. I had to move on. I let it dry, and then I went back in and tried to fix it the best I could. I also put a piece of paper in the pocket so that I could pipe the outside little, I guess, layer, and of course, yep, it had a problem with that too. So I kind of just had to keep going with it, smooth it out, and do my best to keep it neat for the rest of the project. All things considered, it did turn out pretty neat, and I basically just needed to relax and be like, hey, it's fine, it's gonna be covered in paint anyways. This part was like my favorite part, was adding the little squiggles on the crayons, and I did this freehand. I kind of just tried to draw a little M on each one, and I don't think I had any problems while doing the squiggles. So yeah, that was the 10 out of 10 favorite part of this project for me. Baby doesn't want me to try this on, so I will get back to you when she gets up. And this is how the final product turned out. I like it a lot. It fits me well, and I really like that I can use the pocket still if I need to put something in it. I also left the strap long enough that I can tie it as a slip knot, so that when I need to take it off, I can just pull it and it'll come right off. And baby likes it too. That is why she is watching. Goodbye.